The Vietnam War is very debatable, and many people have different opinions about this conflict. We get to learn about the true side of the Vietnam War through Jack O'Leary's experiences. Jack O'Leary is one of the 9,087,000 units that took part in the Vietnam War. Even though Jack didn't leave U.S. soil, he was still very much in danger, and during that time he felt many different feelings.
Everyone you can think of, there was fear, there was happiness, there was all kinds.
Like Jack, many veterans felt the same way, never knowing if there would be another day. Jack O'Leary's experiences during the Vietnam War will forever be engraved in his mind, and he will forever hold his discipline, teamwork, and his hospitality. Jack O'Leary was born in Springfield, Massachusetts, and then later graduated. After he graduated from college, he went into the Air Force in 1969, but before he enlisted, he got married to his loving wife, who now lives with him in Iowa. He decided if he enlisted after his marriage, his wife would be able to come with him, and in fact, she was able to. Like many others, Jack enlisted because he was afraid he was going to get drafted in the military anyway, and thought he had a better chance at getting in the Air Force by doing so. Jack did get in the Air Force and spent 3 out of his 4 years serving in Minot, North Dakota, during the time of the Vietnam War.
Those were the two options. You either enlisted and you had a little bit of more control of what you might be doing in the service, or you waited and if you were drafted, more than likely you would be drafted into the Army, and you wouldn't have a choice of what line of work you were doing.
The Vietnam War, also known as the American War, is the first major lost war in American history. Many branches from the United States Armed Forces fought in this battle, including the Air Force. The Air Force provided many contributions to the Vietnam War. For example, they helped train and equip the South Vietnamese Air Force. They also assisted the military in the early 1970s that ended up with large bombing operations. Because of these bombs, it caused huge destruction and economic disruption in Vietnam, meaning that both sides of the war, the North and the South, suffered major consequences of this conflict. Even though the Vietnam War was never declared a war, and many other wars after the Vietnam War were never declared wars either, the U.S. brought many troops to fight North Vietnam. 58,000 Americans even ended up being killed. You may ask, why did the United States want to involve their troops in the first place? The reasoning behind that is because John F. Kennedy feared that the domino theory would start if Vietnam would fall into communism, meaning that if Vietnam did fall into communism, we feared that many other Asian countries would as well. So President Kennedy decided to get America more involved and increased U.S. aid. Still in the end, Vietnam fell into the communist regime, and North Vietnam became the victor of the Vietnam conflict.
Killed in this war, this conflict, it's like it was for nothing, because we lost, and we did not free this part of the country. So that's it's a very controversial war. And while we're on the subject, from my perspective, when you go to the airport today and you see service people in their uniforms and people start clapping for them, this war or conflict was so controversial, and there's so many people did not agree with it.
Still, many had doubts and concerns of their own about why the government chose to gradually involve the U.S. more and more as time went by, even though the United States knew that it was a lost war. Finally, the conflict did end, yet the controversy did not. It was very hard for veterans, including Jack O'Leary, to still have pride in what they were doing. Jack later talks about why the Vietnam War was so controversial. He tells us his true feelings about the Vietnam War and shows us something that is truly remarkable. Here are his thoughts.
You kind of separate yourself from Hollywood and the real thing, you know. And as I said, I was fortunate that I did not have to go to a war zone, um, but I knew what was going on. Um, you can make the distinction between what you see in movies and the real life.
A newspaper that he had shown us talked about how the U.S. had proudly settled the war, but really the U.S. just withdrew all their forces from Vietnam. At that time, newspapers, televisions, and radios turned the story of the true Vietnam War into what the American eye wanted to see. The media had, without a doubt, spun the story, and this is what Jack had to say about it.
Brought with me a paper. I guess we can use this. And you'll notice it says peace with honor. The Vietnam War was going on in part for decades. The French tried to liberate Vietnam and failed. And then the U.S. got involved, and something like 10 years of this conflict. There was a lot of pressure from the people of this country that were losing their children, their sons and daughters in this conflict, to end this war, to pull out. Well, the powers that be, for whatever reason, were not always honest with the public.
The government was telling the people that we were winning, but in fact, we were not. Even though Jack didn't personally see any conflict, he knew what was going on in Vietnam. He believes that you can't always trust the news and stuff that you see on TV. For example, movies and shows don't show you the real side of the war. Later into the Vietnam conflict, President Nixon had to pull the American forces out. But instead of saying that the US had failed, the media had, in fact, spun it and labeled it peace with honor. The people that had fought in this conflict came home. They were defeated and had no choice but to surrender.
But that's really what it was. The American Army and of service people just came home. And interestingly enough, within weeks after the last U.S. soldier left, Vietnam fell to the communists. So it was pretty sad.
After listening to this story, we learned that many people argued that the media had an important role in US's defeat. People believe that the media negatively reported the Vietnam War. Many say that it weakened US's support, and their reports provide important information that North Vietnam could easily obtain. Still, when the conflict was going on and Jack was still stationed in Minot, North Dakota, this affected him. It didn't show the real side of the war and what family, friends, and most soldiers were going through, including Jack. This disheartened many people in the military. During his time of serving, Jack experienced many uplifting experiences, yet there were still some experiences that weren't so wonderful. One of his most memorable stories is about when he was stationed in the missile silos at the barracks. In this story, he remembers getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning from a phone call every day to stand by the silos at the missile site he was staying near. He talks about having to do so because the silos couldn't get wet. Jack and others had to stand by them every time it snowed or rained to make sure nothing bad happened to each site. Before Jack went to Minot, North Dakota, he had basic training in San Antonio, Texas. Jack went through tough and physical training during his basic training. He had many stories to talk to us about during his time in basic training. A few were about his accomplishments, and some were about things he had overcome.
So they just kind of strip you of all of your personality, because that's what they need to do for you to follow instructions.
There were also funny and memorable moments that he talked to us about. The first story is about him having to crawl under chicken wire during one of his training.
I think it helped. I think it taught you not to give up when you think that you can't do it. I remember they had us down on the ground and there was this chicken wire thing, and we had to get it down on our hands and knees and crawl through this thing and keep our butts down. And if we went up too high, it triggered something, and there was like explosions. It was like, it wasn't actually bullets, but it was the sound of bullets firing, and it deafens you. It's so loud.
We emphasize these stories because they've taught Jack many important things. He has learned discipline and perseverance.
And so it was a wake-up call for me. I didn't expect that to happen, but as I look back on it now, it was okay. It was okay.
Some funny and more memorable stories that he told us were about people that he met, and something that he hopes to be passed on through his basic training camp. The story that he told us was about recruits before him. When he had started at basic training, they had to shave off all their hair, making them look like the same person. The first day, something didn't seem right. Each of the new recruits, including himself, were being called pings. At first, Jack didn't have any clue what this meant, but later he had found out.
Yes, in basic training, we were only there for a few days, and some of the other men who were there longer, they were calling us pings, P-I-N-G. And so we didn't know what that meant. And so we found out later what a ping was. Because they shaved off all your hair, at night they said, when you're sleeping, the sound of your hair growing back is ping. So that was kind of funny. So then after we had been there for a while and the new recruits came in, we got to play the ping thing on them. So it was kind of something that went on from group to group.
Jack O'Leary made many friends during the time he served. He found out that you can't do many things alone in the Air Force. You need to learn how to become a team. Teamwork is very important when you're around a community like the Air Force. Jack learned that during his time serving, and he still thinks that teamwork is very important to him this day. His service has impacted his everyday life, and he will forever remember his time in the Air Force. Jack O'Leary's service did have a huge impact on him. He not only realized that everyone had to become a team, but how much you had to rely on each other. Because of his training, Jack became more punctual and independent. He not only became more punctual and independent, but he also learned discipline. Also, Jack learned that you can't always believe everything that you read, hence the newspaper headline and article. His service also impacted his personal life. Once he joined the Air Force, he couldn't play the piano in the Air Force band. Because of this, he was forced to leave his love of music beside for the time being. Like many others, Jack's life has changed from his journey in the Air Force.
Well, I think that helped later on in life too. You know, sometimes you get a project or you get something you don't think you can do it, but you do.
In all honesty, veterans deserve to be treated with respect, even if newspapers, radios, and televisions are saying otherwise. But remembering that you have to be your true self is important too. It's also important to keep good morals. Unlike World War II, the Vietnam War was a devastation for the U.S., and therefore, veterans were treated very poorly. Not only was the veterans treated poorly, but the conflict was so controversial. Throughout all this, Jack stood close to what he personally believed was right. He learned many things through his experiences and stuck to his morals. Lastly, we would like to thank Jack O'Leary and all the veterans for their service.